Welcome to the Earth Your Wild podcast, brought to you by Reuserbox, providing a better way to buy cardboard boxes. We're your hosts, Jack and Ellie.
This is the podcast where we talk to industry experts and change makers to try to answer the question, how do we make our businesses better for people and the planet? This week we're talking to Alan Mahon, co-founder of Brewgooder. Brewgooder produces great beer that has a positive impact on the planet. Every pint sold helps to fund clean water projects across the world. Brewgooder is also B Corp certified and was recognised as Best for the World in 2019, 2021 and 2022. Thanks for joining us today, Alan.
Thanks for having me on.
I kind of wanted to start, Alan, with just trying to understand where this... where your kind of inspiration comes from, where your passion comes from, because reading your story, it feels like there's a backstory to it, and I'm always really interested to know when we find like a purpose-driven business, where that comes from.
Yeah, totally. I guess like it's hard to kind of pinpoint, but I probably would. I'd probably go back to when I was younger. I guess I was always kind of a bit of a, I don't know, like I wouldn't say entrepreneur, I wouldn't say anything as grandiose as that when I was younger, but like during the summers, I always had this notion that I could like go and just cut people's grass and, you know, go from one house to the next and sort of build up this little mini empire in my neighborhood. But really, I got going legitimately or illegitimately when I noticed a bit of like, I guess, market arbitrage between a drink that I could buy. So I went to a sort of very rural school with lots of different people coming from lots of different places all across the country. And in our canteen, there was a little sort of meant to be a fridge that served chilled drinks, but the fridge never worked. And I used to effectively buy bottles of juice, freeze them, get them chilled right down, bring them in my mum's cooler bag and then into school, and I would sell them for basically 50% margins on what I had bought them for. And this, I was 15, 16 probably. I got shut down quite quickly by the school authorities for obvious reasons, but I loved this notion of like you could actually like provide value or do something business wise. And I think I saved up that money to buy a video game or whatever. So I had this notion that you could kind of make your own things that you wanted to happen in the world by business. But I guess that's kind of married to this notion that I had, that I kind of think certainly my mum and my sisters gave me, that you should kind of use your talents and your time for other people in many respects. So my mum worked in the NHS, most of her life, if not, the vast majority of her career. And then outside of that, she would volunteer in lots of different projects, whether it was looking after, respite care for kids that were sort of disadvantaged in one way or another. And I kind of saw that the whole way through my life, kind of growing up. And when I got to university, I studied politics, which has got absolutely nothing to do with what I'm doing now. I had 4 great years where I worked, went out loads with my mates, had some amazing stories. But I got to the kind of end of that whole journey. And really, I had nothing on, from a CV perspective that you could kind of bring to, the big 4 accounting firms and become a consultant, which was, the path that was always put in front of me, whether it was at school or, in the careers fairs. So I decided I was going to do some volunteer work in that respect, just kind of like marrying the sort of desire, I guess, to travel abroad and see different parts of the world with the notion that whilst I'm there I could improve things. So I went to Nepal when I was 22, just at the sort of end of my university career. It was a sort of female empowerment, school building and education kind of project from how I understood it. And I did what everyone tells you not to do on those trips. Like when you go and prepare to go to like a sort of tropical country, you get needles in your arm like this size. I'm sure if people are listening to audio, I've shown a big needle, and I'm really nervous about anything going into my skin. So I paid lots of money, plus had these like awful experiences of encephalitis injections and rabies and all sorts of stuff. But the one piece of advice they give you for free that's non-invasive is like basically just don't drink the water if you can't crack the top off, if you haven't chlorinated it or done something to boil it off or whatever, because there could be little creepy crawlies inside it. And I was 22 at the time and probably thought I was invincible and didn't really heed that advice too much. So I had some water that was obviously unsafe. 3 weeks into that, I sort of noticed things starting to go a bit wrong. But 3 months into it, I started losing lots of weight. Things just stopped working properly. And when I came home, I had a sort of check for what was wrong with me, and it was a parasite, and that had kind of been living inside me for a while, and it was super easy to get rid of it. Like I think metronidazole, which was the antibiotic that I used, got rid of it in like a week. But for me, that kind of taught me, I think, that I was quite lucky. I'd never had to worry about water. But there was kids maybe born the exact same day as I was born on the 30th of April 1990 that never made it past our collective like 5th birthday. So there's probably 1,000 kids, give or take. And I just thought that was kind of a bit of a injustice. Like I hadn't done anything special versus what they had done, to reach that milestone, and not even just reach that milestone, but go on and have a great life where I went to university and I could get a parasite, but I could come back and I could get better in a week. So I decided that was kind of like a vocational calling for me. Tried to apply for lots of different charity jobs, got rejected from all of them. Applied for the government sort of Department of Aid, which was DFID at the time. Went through a process of applying for that, got rejected right at the end of that process. And when I did eventually get handed a job from one of my best mates' older brothers, it was in a sandwich shop in Edinburgh, and it. That sounds not sort of the job that graduates kind of go into. And I probably thought when I was 22, 23 that, maybe that wasn't something I would jump at. But this sandwich shop, and then we grew it into a chain, we grew it into a really, really big charity, allowed people to come in and buy suspended food and coffee items for homeless and vulnerable people to kind of use and have, so that they always had something, a hot meal or a hot drink. And that for me, like, kind of blew the doors off like what I was, what in my mind were two different ways of approaching things. You could either have this business, and have the satisfaction of building a business and building a brand, etc. But then, over here was charity or impact or, social change or whatever. And Social Bite, which was the sort of cafe chain, sort of showed me that you could actually do those two things almost together in kind of a synergy or harmony. The more you built a successful business, the more you could actually impact people's lives. And I was 23, 24 when I was working there, did some really, really cool stuff, which we can, come on to a bit later. But really, I was spending my money from going from poor student to poor graduate, but I was able to trade up in two things. One of them was coffee, and the other one was beer. And I just decided, wouldn't it be incredible if I could marry that experience that I had from a water perspective with, I guess, the idea that you could sell beer, which, craft beer at the time was booming, and there was, breweries from America, breweries from down the road, there was lagers, ales, stouts, all sorts of sour beers, etc. And wouldn't it be amazing if you could kind of like bring to life, at the time we conceived it as a sort of social enterprise, but really now the more I think about it is an impact brand in beer, a brand that could do amazing things just by selling beer, because beer is all about, for me anyway, about getting together with friends, with family, to celebrate, to watch the sport, etc., etc., etc. So could you harness this innate social power that was in beer, and could you point out something that you kind of felt vocationally called to address, I guess?
Wow. Goosebumps.
Yeah.
No, I love it. There's I think we're quite lucky, because doing this podcast we get to come across those rare people like you who will, experience something, and then it will, you just get like a spark, and you think, actually, I could make it different. I could actually change the world through what I'm doing. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. It was
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Inspirational.
So just to build on what you said, so is it right that you're so every time people buy Brewgooder, sorry, they're helping to make a positive difference with every pint. So is this through funding clean water projects? How does it work?
Yeah, so we've been doing this for 8 years, but the long and short of it is that every pint that we sold since 2016 has in some way contributed to a community or empowerment project, ever at home, which we can come on to, or in the main from a water perspective. So how it really works, and we've tried lots of different ways to make this work. I think at the start we were giving away 100% of our profits, which was just, very only a 25-year-old who hadn't got a clue about how business worked would probably start a business like that. And it worked for a little bit and then didn't work for a bit, and then we had to change it. But we kind of landed on this model that, for every pint of beer that we sold, we would effectively fund the Brewgooder Foundation, which was a charity that we set up on more or less the same day as the company, and it would receive effectively a payment every time we sold beer. So we would do it in hectoliters, which are like 100-liter sort of batches, if you like. But effectively that falls into, per liter, per pint, per can, et cetera, and that gets paid over. And we've just identified, I guess, the sort of impact partners that we want to work with that deliver, water, for example. We've got a really good partnership with Charity Water, and what that allows us to do is kind of make that impact scalable. So as we grow as a business, and we're one of the fastest growing independent beer brands in the UK right now, as that journey continues to grow, the success fuels the commercial success, in essence fuels the contributions to the charity. So I think we're on for 10 times the amount in 2024 given to our charity that we were giving in 2021. So in that 3-year journey, you can see this like escalating ladder of contributions to clean water projects. But also more recently, we've, I guess, looked at other ways in which we can maximize our impact both at home and abroad. So we have one beer at the minute which is incredibly successful. It's a collaboration with the guys at Brooklyn Brewery, which uses an African super grain called fonio, which is drought resistant, fully organic, perennial. But what's really awesome about that project and why we've really embraced it is that we're actually sourcing climate friendly grains from communities where we would in essence have looked at them as potential beneficiaries of the water work. So in the value chain that we create, you could almost say that those communities drank last, if you like. So lots of things had to happen before water would be available in whatever form in those communities. But actually now, with our biggest SKU, if you like, or one of our biggest SKUs, and SKUs are just beers. Yeah. If I start, in hectoliters and SKUs, you can call me up on it. But one of our biggest beers is that those communities effectively eat first in that supply chain. So they are actually we are their customers in many respects. And I think that's just such an awesome thing. And I think what would be amazing is if we were able to loop back around into those communities and do water projects in an ever-growing community sense, where we source some of our grain for our biggest beers. But we also have done lots of cool stuff. I think largely because of the pandemic, and there's a bit of a story here, so bear with me. But back in 2019, when we had this sort of 100% of profits model, we realized that there was going to be a time where we weren't going to make profit. And I couldn't imagine a scenario where, and this is in 2019, right? So COVID hasn't happened yet, where, we would go a full year without increasing the spend on our water project. So we designed this effectively fundraising campaign for the charity called the Global Gathering. And we wanted to get breweries from all across the world to sign up to this, to raise about 500 quid. We were hoping for 150 different breweries to sign up from, mainly America and mainly the UK. And by, the start of 2020, we had I think 253 different breweries signed up from 24 different countries. They were going to raise, self-declared fundraising targets. When you added them all up, were about £300,000. So we had this enormous, campaign going, and it was slated for March, for the 20th of March, which is our birthday, 2020. And I don't know how good your memory is, but the worst. It was called the Global Gathering, and it was meant to get people into tap rooms to drink these one-off beers for this cause and raise money, etc., etc. And yeah, that was the day. Certainly, the UK went into lockdown, and to gather was probably the worst thing you could do. But what was sad about that was that we lost this, potential fundraising platform. We eventually did actually raise about 50 grand through that, as beers kind of trickled out in online sales, etc. But what that taught us was two things, I guess, is that we couldn't rely on that type of model going forward. Like, we had to find a different way to do it. And then immediately on the Friday, I got a phone call from James, the other co-founder, who basically said, listen, we might go out of business here. Like, the way this is looking, and we might just go down in flames. So we should just go out in style. And he decided he wanted to set up a campaign where people could go online, buy a beer for an NHS worker, leave a little message, and then we would effectively send out 4-packs to anybody who came on with an NHS domain name, email address, and send it to their homes. And it was called One on Us. And that was basically on a Friday of the lockdown. And I think within a week we had set up that campaign. And it was our way of saying, right, well, we're going down swinging. It ended up sending, I think, 28,000 beers across the UK with lovely messages, to paramedics, to nurses, to doctors, just basically saying thanks a million for being on the front line of something that was, at the time, we didn't know what was facing us from a an industry perspective, from a health perspective, from our families, our friends, and colleagues and stuff. But what that taught me was that, or what that taught both of us, I guess, was Brewgooder didn't have to be limited to just the water. Yes, the water was my story, and yes, we'll never give up on the water. And every year we're, unlocking tens of millions of liters more water, every time. But I guess the thing it taught us was, could we actually do other stuff that was closer to home? And I think the answer was yes. We, in 2022, launched a beer that allowed, and we had been building this beer and this partnership with a charity called Your Local Pantry, to basically allow people to buy a 4-pack, and then we would try and unlock a food item with every 4-pack that was sold through our partners in the co-op. And we developed this way before the sort of cost of living crisis started to really bite. But it was launched almost, if you like, because of ranging windows during that really intense summer of 2022, when gas prices were going crazy, everything was just going nuts. And it was one of our most successful product launches. Well, to date, it was at that point, it was the most successful, and it kind of allowed us to say that we could make impact on our doorstep. So we're kind of designing our portfolio of beers, looking forward strategically to say, can we continue to do the water thing? Can we unlock 1 billion pints of water over the next 5 or 6 years? Can we continue to source our grain from developing communities, but also can we make impact on our doorstep, and can we actually make a difference in the UK, because it's needed in the UK as well, right? Like, it's not just a sort of international development thing. So whilst water is massively important to us, I think over the next wee while, the actual notion of being able to do many different things that tick a lot of different boxes that are really rooted in what we care about, both at home and abroad, is probably the most exciting thing about the next 5 or 6 years from our perspective.
It's interesting because a lot of businesses out there, they're concerned if they try and do something with their product or their business to give back or make it more purpose driven, that there's a cost involved, and that that often won't equal profit. But it sounds like from your stories, if anything, that's made you more profitable. It sounds like the NHS example. So did that save your business then, effectively? If you hadn't got those 28,000 orders, it didn't
hurt our bit. I mean, we did it at sort of a zero margin, so it didn't necessarily make us, profit margin and sort of float the business. But what it did do was conveniently, I guess, allow us to continue, to get rid of stock, I guess, that we didn't know where it was going, albeit we did grow just through the off trade quite considerably during that year anyway, but it didn't hurt us, right? But it wasn't a cynical sort of, when you're saying that other businesses try to like almost bolt on something, but then go, oof, that's going to cost too much, or, think it's going to be a marketing ploy. What I really think is different between a brand like Brewgooder, and there are other brands, Tony's Chocolate Only, Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, is that they've always wanted to do the thing that they're kind of doing. It's not like they decided in, 10 years into their journey, oh, it would help us sell more X if we bolted on something. And I think the consumer is kind of like anything, right? Like consumers are like people. If they see people acting in ways which wasn't consistent with how they knew them, and your virtue signaling or whatever, they'll not necessarily trust them, or they'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But if you do something that's against that, then they'll call you a hypocrite, right? So I think the balance that we need to strike is the level of understanding that people have, and the ability for us to communicate that we've always done this, since 2016. This was effectively set up as a business to empower 1 million people. That was kind of like the working objective in my head. And as we get closer to that, and as people start to butt up against our brand in a way that don't know the backstory, is that how do we continue to make it authentic? How do we continue to make it credible? And how can we continue to make it look like it's not just that we're chasing after stuff for the benefit? Because there are other ways to make money, right? I mean, the beer industry is tough, right? Like, it is not a great place to be at the moment for lots of different cost pressure reasons. We're certainly not in a position where we are a profitable business, right? We punish ourselves by doing the work that we do, and it will take us longer to get to break even and profitability as a result of that. But it's the right thing to do, because this is what our experiment in business is can you use an industry or a product or a social event or occasion to drive positive social change? And so far so good. We're nowhere near the level we want to be at, ever commercially or from an impact perspective, but we're definitely not going backwards, which is kind of an encouraging thing.
Yeah, I think there's like an authenticity to what you do, which I
think it's really smart, because you've obviously had this idea of, it was just quite personal from you that you want to invest in these water projects, and the stuff you were talking about with the was it with the green? That's obviously helping to tackle climate change. But then you're looking at your demographic and you're like, well, how can we also, I don't know how your demographic reacts to that, how passionate they are. You're obviously going to get some, eco activists out there, but it might not resonate with everybody. So like you talked about with the NHS stuff, that's really listening to them, isn't it? And
and I wonder, like, so just for clarity, like, we've never done a bit of, for maybe we should have done, but we've never done any research that says like this is what our drinkers care about, right? Like, in many respects, we probably will in the future, but it's not like we've looked at the data and said, right, we need to move, to this issue or that issue. It's always been like what's kind of felt right for us as people. Like, we are people as well, right? And James and I have this sort of like, I wouldn't call it like a spidey sense, but like we know where to sort of say it would be easy to do cause A, right, and have a beer about cause A. But is it really what we care about, or is it really rooted in something that's authentic to us? So I spent 5 or 6 years in the homeless sector, for example. I could credibly claim we could launch a beer tomorrow, right? And I would understand my motivation to that. But how do we explain that to the consumer, right? And how do we get past certain contradictions, or how do we make it feel authentic? We could do, food campaigns, et cetera, as long as people know it's coming from a place that is genuine, and we're not just doing it, like I say, to massage the numbers from a marketing perspective, from a sales perspective. But eventually I'd love to get to the scale where the opposite is true, right? If you're the one buying our beer, to your point about, our demographic of consumers, you're effectively the change agent there. Like, we're just kind of like a middleman in many respects. could you give over some of your own decision making within a framework that makes sense to say, well, what would you guys like to fund in some capacity? And I think that would be really, really interesting. I think
almost
it would be
like a crowdfunder, but by
yeah,
beer.
yeah, exactly,
Beer funder.
exactly, and yeah, peer funder. And could that be something that galvanizes our customers or consumers? I think the great and exciting thing about the brand is that we're creating this space credibly and authentically to be able to imagine something like that. Whereas, there are lots of brands in lots of different industries which are not authentic and it can be seen through. And I think that's the challenge, and maintaining that authenticity and the human side of it is paramount. Like, it's the only thing that really differentiates us, I think, in many ways from any other business.
Do you think all businesses should have some kind of vision for greater impact, whether that's social, environmental, and if so, how can businesses do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably almost contradict the point I just made, but yeah, I mean, I think the bigger the size of the business, the bigger the impact can be if it's done in the right way. If other people in our industry wanted to work with us to scale up our impact, I mean, that would be a fantastic opportunity. They might not have done that type of work in the past or, adjacent to it. But if you see an opportunity and if the leadership genuinely want to go on a long-term journey for, climate change or climate action, water, whatever it looks like, local impact, then I think that's a net positive to society, and I hope it would be a net positive to their business. I think what's really interesting is that business is so, omnipresent in our lives in some shape or form that, if you aggregate all those things together, there could be legitimate and great transformational social change possible. Certainly from an environmental perspective, I think that businesses are the ones that are going to have to lead that change. I think governments can legislate and do whatever, but really it has to come from, whether it's the bottom line motivation or it's the sustainability. And I mean, not sustainability with a capital S in terms of environmental sustainability, but just like, is there going to be a planet left to make stuff on, right? There has to be those incentives aligned. And when those incentives align, I think there is the potential for transformational change. I can't speak, I'm definitely not a guru, right? Like, I don't want to come on here, and I don't think it's right for me to come on here and say this is how it should be done. You should adopt the Brewgooder business model or whatever, because maybe that's not appropriate for different sizes of business or different industries or whatever. But I think it should definitely be led. It should definitely be a more important part of your decision making, and it should be led by people who genuinely believe in it. And if those two things can come together at the same time as other external circumstances, then business can change the world. Like, I don't have a problem being that hopeful and optimistic about it.
We noticed you have a work in progress program. So about trying to kind of improve diversity in the brewing industry.
Yeah. I mean, is the brewing industry the most inclusive and diverse industry in the world? Probably not. Is it the worst culprit for it? Probably not either. Is there a way to work towards an industry where more people are represented, whether that's at a employment level, leadership level, consumer level? Like, could we include more people in such a fascinating industry and such an amazing product? I think the answer is definitely yes. Like, our perspective is that we'll never reach perfection in that, even internally, because that's why we called it work in progress. We'll always try and get better, and we'll maybe never perfect it. But for me, if you look at craft beer historically in particular, there was always this notion that, or not always this notion, but it always seemed to me that I actually kind of stood out from a lot of the stereotypes, if you like, tattoos and beards and heavy metal music and sort of ethos of anarchism and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure if you were to think of craft beer, that those types of things come to mind. There was an added level of gatekeeping around what brewery was cool, or what style was trendy, and there was a snobbishness to it. And I always felt like an outsider. I felt like Brewgooder was kind of a trivial thing for lots of people, and we could never find our way into the center of that. And maybe we never will, and probably don't want to either, because we consider ourselves more an impact brand than a craft beer brand. But if I felt like that, right, and I'm white, I have a somewhat of a beard, you know what I mean? I'm a guy, I'm in my 20s, I'm relatively middle class. If I felt like that, how would other people feel if they were to try and break into that industry, whether they were female or person of color, or anything really that wasn't what people imagined? And for me, it was about, could we break down some of those barriers? So we launched a scholarship with Heriot-Watt University, and an intern. It's developed into an internship as well, where we took people who were maybe sat outside that mainstream of the stereotype, if you like, and tried to integrate opportunities for people to get into the industry, and effectively they were the ones that would then build that change. So it's definitely something we should be better at. Like, I don't think we're even good at some of the aspects of the work in progress commitments that we have, but we've got a team that's really determined to make it a success over the long term. We're starting our first internship with a sort of underrepresented graduate, in order to add little bits of diversity and where we can. Are we going to change the industry overnight? Definitely not. But I think if enough people see our example, or can learn from the stuff that we've done right or wrong, and apply that at a bigger scale, then I think that's definitely a net benefit for the industry for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you are kind of leading the industry in a way, even though obviously you guys have come in and you're kind of the new kids on the block kind of thing. But yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's nice of you to say, but like, we are a very, very small business in a very, very big industry, and we hope to lead where we can, but also allow others to lead where they can as well, and maybe make a greater amount of change by doing things that are
I think I think the way that you lead is I think what you're doing is I don't know if you even do it consciously, but what you're saying is you're kind of like, this is what we're about, everybody join us, and that's something I've not seen before in many industries, especially in your industry. And I think that's the powerful thing. It's just so authentic. Everybody join us, get involved. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. If you don't want to join us, fine. But if you do, get involved. And it's it's wonderful to see, and it's working.
we definitely need more impact businesses like this, because we bang on about it all the time, but like, how many truly impact businesses are there? You mentioned Tony's Chocolonely. It made me think, when you said that we started off and we gave 100% of our profits to charity, it made me think of another
Innocent.
Was it Toast Ale as well? I think they said that they did that and it nearly bankrupted them or something.
Innocent did that, now they're owned by Coca-Cola. So
well,
I mean, it's not easy, right? Like, I think whether it's Toast or whether it's whoever, it's not an easy thing to do. I think one of the big challenges we had was that we were 25 when we started the company, and we hadn't a clue, right? Like, you wanted to do it all. You wanted to give away your profits and do this stuff and grow and all of those things. Like, there were little tiny contradictions, and if you look at even what we looked like and sounded like in 2016 versus where we are now, I mean, it's almost like a different company, right? The thread that runs through it is that we've tried to get better at the reason we started. Like, that's kind of the only thing that's almost consistent. Everything's got better, I think, and will continue to get better, and hopefully you'll start to see that change and evolution accelerate in the next wee while. But we were just like bleeding heart, idealists, right? And it just didn't work. And it's just staying alive long enough for it not to work, for it to work, for something to work, and then to grab onto that, and then pull yourself up. And when you say, like, we need more businesses like ours, like, I would almost say one of my main motivations, even when it's really, really tough, is if we can stay alive long enough, right? And I know this is quite pessimistic because we're growing, a lot, and there's lots to be excited about. But at its base level, if we can stay alive long enough to inspire other people to learn from our mistakes, but be inspired by our example, then I think that could spawn lots of different businesses, which are 10 times better than Brewgooder in whatever industry somebody's interested in disrupting for the right reasons. So that was always my motivation as a sort of business leader, if you like. I don't really like using that term, but like an entrepreneur or whatever, was that if I dedicated my life to something like Brewgooder and it worked out, it would work out for me, and that would be great. But it would also work out for lots of other people in lots of different ways, right? Whereas if I had went down a more traditional route, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, the circle of people it might have worked out for would have been smaller. And I always think that no matter what, I'm not painting some sort of picture between somebody who has this social purpose and somebody who doesn't, because ultimately you get into business, you start a business to probably do the most basic human thing ever, which is to have a better life for yourself and a better life for your family. And I think that's legitimate, and I think that's all businesses have a purpose in that sense, right? But that wider purpose, that wider impact, if that could be integrated into the same motivations as you have for starting a business to get a better house or to put your kids through better schools or whatever, then if that can be extrapolated into people that you might not come in contact with or might not know you even exist, I think that's quite a powerful thing. And hopefully our example might inspire one or two more people to start a business, which is success for me.
I think it totally does. I think that's like a really nice point, because I remember, so obviously our business, we sell boxes, and I had no interest in selling cardboard boxes. And like, for me, I thought going into business was just about making as much money as possible. And I didn't really have any interest in that at all. And we kind of accidentally started this environment. It started a bit more gradually for us, but it was nice when I realized that there were other companies, like Brewgooder, like Patagonia you mentioned, and who were actually doing these amazing things. And I never thought that was possible. Maybe I've just been living down a hole or something, but I didn't, a few years back, I never realized. And I came across things like B Corp, and I was like, there's actually these whole communities of people that actually care, and they can still have a business and make money. So yeah, it's really inspirational.
Or maybe you just realized who you were actually by doing it, right? Like, that's probably my perspective on it, is that you weren't some sort of like greedy capitalist person who's, was just out there to make money, and that was your value set. Maybe that was one aspect of, accessibility into this notion of building a business. And then once you started to build a business, you started to realize how much you cared about other stuff, right? Like, that's probably truer. And I think that potential is in lots of people, right? Like, a lot of people go, oh, I couldn't do what you do or whatever. And I'm like, listen, I'm just sell beer and try to do, my co-founder says I went around the opposite ways. That what you really want to do was set up a big charity, and no one would hire you in the charity, and you didn't want to, so you set up a beer company to fund it. And I was like, yeah, that probably is what the motivation was. But at the time I was just like, how cool would it be just to sell beer and then like do cool stuff with it, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, and to do stuff that, like, if you could pick, when you see business people, they become successful business people, then they become philanthropists. Why couldn't you just do the bit side by side? Almost, I feel like.
I guess it shows you can sell a product and make it purpose driven and do great things with that. So you've shown it's possible.
Yeah, and that lays down the gauntlet for anyone listening to this that has the desire to do both as well. And I definitely think it's a rewarding journey. If we were to go bankrupt tomorrow for whatever reason, I think the 8 years or 9 years that I've spent doing this were well worth it for lots of different reasons.
Yeah, and on that, so because like the wonderful thing is that, like, these days people like you really can influence the society around you, because everybody knows what you're doing because you're talking about it and communicating it. So for any of our listeners that might want to set up a purpose-driven business or might be looking for advice, what would you give them? What are the biggest things you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I learned was, like, your business model has to be scalable. If it's not scalable, it's not going to work, right? So the 100% of profits thing was just so difficult for many reasons that we would have got to a certain level and then plateaued, and it would have been really, really challenging. And I don't think that approach would have got us through the pandemic or got us through the cost of living and, inflationary crisis that we experienced, the past few years. I think I was just too hungry to get out there and put it out in the world, as opposed to, which, because I was 25, right? I was young and pretty naive. As a 33-year-old, I would say sit down and break your business model on paper. Like, what would have to be true for this to succeed forever? And if it can't succeed forever, then something's wrong. So go back and fix it before you start it. And I think if we had started it this way instead of that way, we'd be further on. But I also recognize that because we started so blatantly, optimistically, naively, it also is part of the story of why we're different, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, that stupidness almost of saying that we could do this and achieve what we wanted through this method is part of the reason why Brewgooder kind of resonates with people, because they think, well, okay, they found a better way to do the thing that they've always wanted to do. But I would love to save myself the headache and the pain of finding that out during the journey, as opposed to fixing it at the start. So that would probably be my my one piece of advice: is break your own business model. And if you can't break it because you fixed it, then go for it.
I think the ironic thing is people will probably listen to that advice and they will probably still make the same mistakes.
Yeah, but that's life, right? We're all human, and they probably are doing something so radically different from me that they won't be able to anticipate what will be the challenges in their future. So yeah, I guess if you want a different way to look at it, is just go for it.
Yeah, but from like a business perspective, how has being purpose driven helped Brewgooder?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely given us outsized share of voice, I guess, in terms of speaking to people like yourselves, right? People are interested in it. Customers are interested in it. I mean, like retailers and pubs and stuff. I guess it gives you something different, but that wasn't the point of it, right? Well, the point of it wasn't to have a sort of USP in that respect. But I do think people are prepared, if you are doing or trying to do the right thing, to give you a bit more airtime. And sometimes that's all you need to do is have a bit more airtime. And I always think that, like, there's a story so as part of that, the sort of social bike business that I used to work for when I was younger. Part of it was we had a fundraising dinner, and we had to sell tables to it, in essence, right? And at the very, very start, it was literally like cold calling businesses to say, like, do you want to come to this? And what I realized very, very quickly was that I was in Scotland doing this, but I had an Irish accent, and people were prepared to give you like 20 seconds more because your accent was different or nice. Yeah, and I really, really honed in on this. And I thought, if you add up all those 20 seconds over the course of like all the calls I had to make, like that would make it more like 1 in 5 would be more successful, or whatever. It would give people a reason to stay on the call longer than they otherwise would have. And I do think that that's what the impact element of what we do also provides our business. People are prepared to give you that little split second more, or they'll prepared to take the meeting rather than not take the meeting, or they'll read the email, or do you understand what I mean? It's like, and then you compound all these things together.
I think it's your kind of like onlyness, I think for whatever reason you've turned into this person that really cares passionately about having a positive impact on these different things, and that's given your brand an onlyness, because people probably don't want another beer brand. But people love hearing about your story, and I think when you tell it, it's like, well, why wouldn't I want to get involved in that? Beers, I think, to be fair, I think you probably, in a parallel universe, you could probably be selling anything other than beer. but running the same business.
Yeah, potentially. And I think, if I could go back and realize how challenging and competitive and, you know, difficult it is to actually run a beer brand, like it's hard. It's a hard thing to do, but it's a really rewarding thing to do at the same time. Like maybe I could have picked something else, right? But I just love the industry for many different reasons. So I'm glad I kind of landed in this one. And it's, the interesting bit you said there is like when someone hears your story, like I fundamentally believe that, right? Like I fundamentally believe if I could spend 15 minutes with every beer drinker in the country, I could convince them to drink Brewgooder. But it's how do you have those 15 minutes with people, and how do you condense that into 15 seconds and broadcast that in a way, or make that available to people who understand it really, really succinctly. Because it is that the story is the thing that really drives our business. For good or for bad, we need to find out how to distribute that message.
And how do you do that? Just
yeah, I mean, listen, our market. It's funny. We had an interview recently, and someone was telling us about a brand at your stage in your life cycle should be spending, I think it was like 10 to 20% of your revenue on marketing. And me and my co-founder James looked at each other and we sort of did the maths, and we were like, that would effectively equate to like a £1 million marketing budget. And I think outbound marketing for us is like, fraction, like a 0.5% to 1% of our so we are not telling our story en masse at this moment in time. We do most of it via packaging. We do most of it via, I guess, word of mouth, and people talking about the story and getting good distribution and having really fun, engaging stories and stuff. But we haven't really told the Brewgooder story yet in a consumer facing way. And I think that's the most exciting bit. Like James and I always say, the best thing about this brand is that nobody knows about it. Do you know what I mean? Like almost like nobody knows about it. And when they do, that's when things will start to really, really take off. So yeah,
it's the fight club of beer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully a bit more of a positive outcome than that. But yes, 100%. Word of mouth, and it grows and it grows and it grows, and people become quite passionate about it. And then there will be that moment, hopefully in the future, where there is the broadcast, piece versus the word of mouth piece. But we want to make sure that we're the best possible version of ourselves that we can be before that broadcast moment happens.
Got to go out and buy some Brewgooder.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I guess I have to do the plug. You can find us in Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Co-op, Asda, and any good bar that stocks. I guess it's quite difficult to go bar by bar, but and you can obviously shop on our website. But yeah,
amazing.
Everybody buy Brewgooder.
So what are Brewgooder's plans for the future then? I guess you kind of touched on that there.
Yeah, I mean, we're launching new beers, that sort of consolidate our impact story, make it easier for consumers to understand what it is that they're doing. I guess just growing our product offering, but also just becoming more widely available in the places that people, want to be able to find us. One day I hope that we're in more countries in the UK, because I think this is something that people can understand from lots of different places, and really just try and crack the on trade. The pubs and restaurants and hospitality. Gen Z drinkers are going to, Gen Z and millennial drinkers are going to be 66% of the drinking population within the next 5 years. That's huge. They want brands like ours, and we think that the impact side of our business can be a new premium within the industry that is crying out for a new premium. So we're really excited. We're confident. And then alongside that, commercial growth is, we want to make our foundation, our non-profit, the most credible, authentic, engaging non-profit in the beer industry. And I think we've made, our first hire in essence to make that happen. We've got an awesome set of trustees, and now we just have to roll out a strategy that makes that true. So really excited. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be stressful. But the juice is worth the squeeze, hopefully.
Nice.
Exciting.
We so last question. We like to ask everybody this. So we like to end by asking where you see the world in 10 years. a lot of people might sort of give two sides to that, where they see it and where they would like to see it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Where I could definitely give you I'm a current affairs junkie, and I think if you just look narrowly at what's happening right now, you tend to be negative. So I'll skip that one. No one wants to hear that. What I think the world will be like in 10 years is that I'm a big believer in demographics. Like, well, not a believer, like as if there's something to believe. Demographics is like destiny, right? So the change in populations, between young and old people and the people who are then becoming decision makers in businesses and government, etc. When they change and those cohorts move so that millennials and Gen Zs are the decision makers, I think that's going to be a really positive thing because they have a value set which is very, very different. Subtly different in some ways, but very different in other ways to what they prioritize. And I think, and I definitely believe in the notion of there's a German poet called Hölderlin who says more or less like where the danger is, the saving power also comes from. So the challenges that we have as a society, climate change, inequality, culture war, all that sort of stuff. Like actually, this is because we recognize those dangers, we can actually fix them. And I think that the people who are coming through my generation and certainly younger have a different set of priorities. And I think that could make the world a better place. Like we have always progressed in one way or another, over the centuries that are past, and those changes become shorter and quicker and almost more dramatic. And I do believe that we'll enter a world, hopefully, which is more equal, more sustainable, and I guess just is the foundation for human flourishing. And that, could be everything from using AI correctly to just, rethinking what our economies look like and, what our products and services are made from. And I don't want to, be too naive about that, but I do think that that's as much as a possibility as any of the bad stuff happening as well.
Well, thank you. That was really good.
Well, thank you.
Really
That was
enjoyed
really
that.
good. Really
Oh, good.
enjoyed
Yeah.
that.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. We hope it was truly
Earth your while.
For more information, visit reuserbox.co.uk/earthyourwhile.
And if you'd like to appear on the next series of Earth Your While, please email media@reuserbox.co.uk.